Early on in the debate, you talked about student assessments or placements are no longer an account. That's part of this, right? Yep. Early in the debate, you mentioned, as I think we all know now, that student assessments and placements are no longer going to count, but the field test will continue, correct? We can't use the scores in the student assessments or the teacher assessments, right? Or maybe you can clarify if I'm wrong.
Hold on, is your mic working, Ms. Nolan?
I've had enough. Okay. I went to standby on my has a mind of its own. Understandably so, because we have been here a while, but that's the important and good stuff that we do. Okay. The legislation would, by requiring more forms, requiring SED to print 20 different forms, would eliminate the field tests, and that would be a good thing. So if I suggested anything else, I apologize, I don't think I did, but you know, it's a long debate. Field tests go as a result, excuse me, of this legislation, and that's a very good thing.
But it says in section, well, on page 2 of the bill, section 46, the commissioner shall take actions to reduce field tests for students taking the state administered.
There have been conversations with the State Education Department. They've indicated, and I'm reading this from our bill memo and the notes that I've been provided by our councils, the State Education Department has indicated that this would eliminate standalone field tests and allow the State Education Department to provide more questions directly to teachers, and they would then use race to the top funds to implement this important provision.
They're indicating that where? Because it's not in the language of your bill, and that's what we're going to vote on, is the language of the bill. So did they indicate it in a letter, in a memo? I'm not sure where you got that from.
Well, our language would require the commissioner to print 20 different test forms for grades 3 to 8, and that the consequence of that would be to eliminate the field test.
But yet your bill says reduce, not eliminate.
If you note, there was some discussion earlier that the regions themselves have adopted 17 or 19 different proposals. One of them says, if you give us let us print more test forms, we will eliminate the standalone field test. So our legislation responds to that by saying, these are the resources you can use, print more test forms. We authorize you to do that. The consequence will then be, and since the regions adopted eliminating the field tests, they will eliminate the field test.
But they could decide not to, I suppose.
No, they couldn't, because they've said in a public way at a vote of the last region's meeting that if the legislature authorizes them to get rid of the field tests by allowing them to print more test forms, they will eliminate the field tests. So they took a vote on that. That would be a regent's regulation, which is now already in effect. We're giving them the tools they need to do that. One of the reasons it's so disappointing our colleagues in the majority in the Senate have not moved forward with legislation is that's almost a simple thing that would relieve so much anxiety from parents and kids, and yet we haven't seen a bill from the Senate. So these are the kind of simple things that I hope that your side of the aisle's great support for these changes will translate up or down. You know, we like to think the Assembly's really the upper house, right? Will translate and bubble over to them so that they can, you know, kind of get off their senatorial splendor and put in a bill. And then if they put in a bill, we can move forward. But right now, if this happens, those field tests would be gone.
Why does SED even need our okay to do it? Why couldn't they just act on their own and do it?
Well, I'm going to assume, I don't know, perhaps you're an attorney. I'm always grateful in these debates, sometimes that I'm not. It's our understanding of the voluminous educational laws in our state, which I guess is 3012C, that's the section we're amending, that there's a whole body of regents regulations that go back 200 years. You know, this is the most appropriate way to do it as advice of the councils who work on these issues, and I feel comfortable with that.
Well, I'm not an attorney. My father always said I should have been because I always had to have the last word. I'm not an attorney. I was a pilot, so I'll be addressing the airplane analogy
I think
shortly.
I get the last word, Mr. McLaughlin.
I'll be addressing the fallacy of that argument in a few minutes, but is SED and the region's role, is it to set education policy or to set curricular guidelines for the state of New York?
The regions of the state of New York have existed for over 200 years. The year I came to the legislature, I was given a copy of their 200th anniversary booklet, That was 30 years ago, so that's a pretty long time ago. And I've said often on this floor that they are not unique. There are some other states that have them, but they are a key component in trying to keep politics out of the classroom. We take these steps to guide them with some reluctance.
How's that working?
But no, I think we take some steps to guide them with some reluctance. We want to have them as a filter. We want to have them as educational leaders. I remind the body they serve without compensation. So there are 19 people that stepped up to be leaders in education. They don't get any compensation for that. They do it out of their commitment. They have the ability to authorize and promulgate rules and regulations and directives. They work with the Department of Education, which, remember, the department certainly has to respond to the governor through the division of the budget, which allocates the funds for the Department of Education, so the governor has a lot to say. The Senate has a lot to say because they, too, sign off on budgetary appropriations for the department, and we do, too. But in the end, there are some powers vested to us and some powers vested to the regents and some powers vested to the local school districts. This bill tries to, I think, kind of right the balance for the local districts once again.
What's the governor's role then? You mentioned that he has some authority because he spent better part of a year denying that he had any authority over SED.
I think the governor, I mentioned at the start of the debate, maybe you weren't here, Mr. McLaughlin, that the governor, I even was able to get it on the phone, which is so cool, right, when you can do that. But I thought the governor had very wise words in some advertisement that was issued yesterday where he said we have to pause, we have to put our children first, we have to reduce test anxiety. I think everyone has realized from the great voice of the people, the Vox Populi, from these forums and others, that we need to take a pause. The regents have taken a pause with various rules and regulations. The Assembly is taking a pause. The governor is putting a commercial out and has a commission that I was at the meeting for a little while today to look at taking a pause. We're still waiting for the Senate, though. Senate's had a lot of hearings, but no legislation yet.
Well, it's interesting that now the governor wants to pause because are you aware of the letter that he sent to Merrill Tisch, the chancellor of the regents?
Is that on the bill, Mr. Speaker?
Well, you just mentioned the governor and his role in asking to pause, so I think it's germane.
No, Mr. Speaker, I was asked what role the regents have, and I tried to clarify that.
But you clarified it on clarifying what the governor's role was in education, and then went on to talk about
No,
how
I
he
clarified
not
the
wants to
regents'
pause.
role. I clarified the regents' role.
1 minute, please.
You clarified
One
the
minute.
governor's role.
1 minute, please. Thank you. So we will desperately try at this late hour to stay on the bill in chief. And I understand there's a free flow and give and take, so we'll try and give a little less and take a little more.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I think it's germane, given what is going on here. But I'll move on. I'll speak about that when I'm speaking on the bill.
The bill.
Not on the bill yet. No, I said I'll mention a little bit more when I'm on the bill. I have a few more
I
questions.
wasn't trying to rush you, Mr. McLaughlin. Hardly.
God forbid. So the testing, by and large, at this point, is still going to be there. We're just not going to count it against the teacher evaluations. Not correct?
That's incorrect.
Okay,
We've
that's
covered
fine.
this several times. I'm happy to cover it again.
That's
Happy
fine.
to take as much time as needed. The children's promotional status, high-stakes testing comes out. The tests are given. They cannot be the only measure used to advance a child.
You
or hold
just
a
said the
child back.
tests are given. The tests are still being given.
Tests are important for teachers and students to learn and to understand what a child has learned. We've been testing children statewide for 20 years in our state. We are decoupling any suggestion that your test score is your ticket to advance or for promotion, and we're even going further and requiring the State Education Department and its commissioner to work with localities, and that each locality each of the 698 school districts must issue a promotional policy. So parents are well aware that the test has very little to no bearing on their child's advancement, and they have to articulate what methods they do use for the child's advancement.
But that, I got to tell you, as a father of two very competitive boys, and I'm sure many of us have competitive children, you can say all you want you're not keeping score. Go to a baseball game and say you're not keeping score. Those kids know the score. They understand when they pass. They understand when they fail. You cannot put a score up on the scoreboard. They're still keeping score in their head, and that's part of the problem with this. The tests are still being given. You may say they're not counting. It's still affecting those kids. So they are still being administered, as you just admitted, and you can say you're not going to count them all you want. The kids will. They're going to internalize that. They keep the score inside their head. What is being done in your bill to address the needs of the special ed children.
Students with disabilities and English language learners would require the commissioner to, the bill would require the commission to evaluate, provide a report on the effectiveness of the implementation of the Common Core on the education of students with disabilities. The commissioner must study whether school districts are appropriately following testing accommodations as directed by the IEP or Section 504 plan.
But they'll still be tested. There's no addressing the fact that you're having these kids take tests that are not appropriate for them. There's nothing in the bill stopping that.
SED has submitted a waiver to the federal government as part of the region's action plan on this to have a waiver from the federal government on this as well, so that they would, again, sort of decouple the, and have more appropriate tests for children. This has been a key criticism of the race to the top nationwide, and New York is one of many states, and I believe, again, that that will be a successful effort to do that.
But until we get that waiver, the tests continue.
Well, not really, because the legislation, if it was to be passed into law, and you could convince your colleagues in the Senate to help us in doing that, it would require the commissioner to have a report, have an effectiveness report. It would require that the tests not be a high-stakes gateway going forward.
But we don't have a Senate sponsor yet, do we?
Well, we're hoping, I must say, I'm really hopeful and confident that our colleagues, after so many hearings on their side, will do that. And your involvement and the involvement of the minority in such a large way on this issue would indicate to me that this is an issue with bipartisan support. I'm relying on you guys to do that.
Well, yeah, Democrat could sponsor it over there as well. They haven't chosen to do so either. So maybe you could work on one of your colleagues on that side as well.
We'll work together.
I look forward to that. So
Yes, thank you.
you talked earlier about negative consequences and the negative. What if the negative consequence is the giving of the test itself? I mean, you talked early on when you first got up to speak. You talked about we're trying to avoid negative consequences, but it seems like the test itself may be the negative consequence. That's not really a question. I'll just go on the bill. How much time do I have left, Mr. Speaker? Because I got a few minutes here to. As I said in another famous debate, I will be back.